This is the Registered Behavior Technician course presented by Shaza Attar. The course content was created by Shaza Attar and is the property of Autism Therapy and Training, Inc. All rights are reserved. This training program is based on the Behavior Analyst Certification Board 2018 RBT Task List 2nd Edition and is designed to meet the 40-hour training requirement for the RBT credential. The program is offered independent of the BACB. Remember, in each class, we will have our active listening, a quiz, and a competency assessment.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. Today I want to talk about antecedent manipulation strategies, which is one of the items on your task list. If you recall back to our last class, we talked about functions of behavior and behavior plans. One thing I want you to bring to this class is your knowledge in the functions of behavior, because this will be very helpful when we look at manipulating antecedents to improve behavior. Antecedent manipulation strategies is when antecedent stimuli are altered to evoke desirable behaviors. These behaviors can be reinforced. Undesirable behaviors are then decreased. What this allows a practitioner to do is change events that precede a behavior so that we can prevent behavior in the future. For example, you want to go on a healthy diet. You find yourself eating chips, chocolate, and drinking pop throughout the day. What are some antecedent manipulation strategies you could use? So think about it for a moment. So let's break this down. The behavior is you going to the cupboard or fridge to get these items. What is the antecedent? Having the items in the home would evoke this behavior versus not having the items in your home. So if you got rid of all the junk food from your home and work and other environments that you're in and replaced the junk food with fruits and vegetables and water, chances are you won't eat those items anymore because they're not in your environment. So now, when you go to the fridge or cupboard, those unhealthy items are not there for you to select. So the only choice you have is the healthy options. Here's another example. You always take the same route to work in the morning. Every morning you stop at Tim Hortons or your favorite coffee shop and get a coffee. You've been spending a lot of money on coffee and want to cut back on your morning cup. What are some antecedent manipulation strategies you could use? So again, what precedes the behavior? What can you change that would decrease the behavior of you stopping at that coffee shop? Well, one, you could take a different route to work. Now, sometimes you find a Tim Hortons or that coffee shop on every corner, which makes it very difficult. But you could start making a coffee at home and you can bring that into work with you. Or you could put your wallet in the trunk and therefore you can't buy that cup of coffee. These are all antecedent strategies that would prevent you from engaging the behavior of purchasing coffee. Now this diagram here shows the antecedent stimulus. What precedes the behavior, then you have the problem behavior, that kick, scream, push, throwing, or the desirable behavior, the asking, doing a task, following directions, and so on. Whether the learner is engaging in problem behavior or desirable behavior, the outcome will be the same, which is the maintaining consequence. The idea here is how can we teach a learner to use the appropriate behavior which will result in the maintaining consequence rather than engaging in the problem behavior? So let's change behavior. I'm going to review 6 tips that are used in the field to increase desired behavior and decrease problem behavior using antecedent manipulation strategies. I use these all the time in my practice and teach my staff these tricks. These will help you get a more cooperative learner. The goal is to have the learner engage in the skill or behavior that we need for them. If you're a parent and you want them to cooperate and get dressed or eat their breakfast so that you're not late for work, if you're a teacher, you want the learner to complete a task or share with other students. If you're a therapist, you want them to ask for their reinforcer, sit nicely, or maybe walk in the classroom. So usually the end goal is for the learner to follow instructions, but this is where we might encounter some issues. So let's take this behavior as an example. The instructor therapist says to the learner, back to the table, and there's a math worksheet on the table. The learner sees this, screams, and runs, and the learner escapes the task. So what could the therapist have done differently when we're examining antecedent manipulation strategies? Take a moment and think about this one. Well, the first thing that you want to do is present the SD or cues for the desired behavior. You want to add more cues in the environment for that desired behavior. You want to make things easier for the person, so by adding these cues, the client is more likely to engage in the behavior that you want them to engage in. For healthy eating, you can post notes of healthy facts to encourage good eating habits on your fridge, at your desk, and in your wallet, creating a grocery list before going to the grocery store. These are things you do before the problem behavior occurs, so that you prevent it from occurring. So when you're at the grocery store, you may be more likely to stick to your list, especially when you have reminders about healthy eating. To help the learner come back to the table successfully, you can place reinforcing toys on the table to entice your learner to come back to the table. Now, of course, if you paired your table well with reinforcers, you may not get this problem behavior. But if your learner has had a bad experience with the table, you may find that they are resistant to coming, and having reinforcers on the table will decrease the motivation to escape the table, and they'll come to the table willingly. The function of the behavior here is escape motivated. We want to decrease the motivation for escape by altering the antecedent. We have brought learners back to the table using highly reinforcing items and making the table a fun place. Let's look at some other situations. Have you ever played with a learner who gets up and just leaves you? That's tough. You're working hard to engage your learner and they decide to just get up and leave. How can you change this? You can give your learner choices so that they are not escaping you. For example, pull out a variety of toys and have the learner choose the item that they're most interested in. Sometimes we try to lead the play and control it, and so your learner loses interest. Giving choice can improve the play and sustain their attention. You also want to play creatively and have a variety of ways to play. We talked about this in our other classes. Most importantly, listen to the learner. Stay in tune with their interests and go with that. I've seen therapists try playing with cars while the learner is turning their back and trying to play with the phone. Go with their motivation and play like them. Circle time is another challenging time for many teachers and therapists. During these times, you can use props during circle time and make it interactive and fun. If you're talking a lot during circle time, your learner will probably just leave. If you read long stories, this may get very boring for them. It all depends on their skills and abilities. But you're more likely to succeed with a learner and have them stay during group time when it's fun and you have puppets and you're using musical instruments, and also when you have the learners participate. You can have the learners fill in parts of songs, label things, point to things, copy your actions. Sing-along books are great as well. Think for a moment about a time that you had to run circle time. What happened? What did you notice? Most often, learners will leave circle time. What if you had cues during circle time to help them follow along? Having a visual schedule, maybe even pictures of the songs you'll be singing along, and so on, could be very helpful. During work, you can also use visual schedules or agendas on the table. You can have a break card on the table to help the learner request a break instead of engaging in problem behavior. Having their communicative system, iPads, PECs, visible will be important for those that engage in problem behavior to gain access to their reinforcers. Remember, we want to leave out the right cues for the learner to engage in the correct behavior. We want to ensure that they succeed by having the right ways of asking to leave their work rather than just getting up and leaving. The learner who is attempting to escape the table to gain access to their reinforcer is a child escaping the table to access something most often. So by bringing the reinforcers to the table, we're decreasing that motivation to escape to gain access to those items. So one of the next important elements of antecedent manipulation strategies is to create establishing operations for the desired behavior. Make the outcome of the desired behavior more reinforcing. By placing the most reinforcing toys on the table, the learner is more likely to engage in the desired behavior. Similarly, decreasing the amount of edibles during the day so that the learner is hungry at lunchtime. Often therapists, teachers, or parents will get behaviors around meal times, and it's often because the learner has had snacks throughout the day, which decreases the EO for food. They've satiated. So controlling the amount of food they get in is really important if you want to decrease those problem behaviors at meal times. Don't wait for problem behaviors to happen at the table. Reinforce those appropriate behaviors by giving frequent breaks. For example, suppose that you brought your learner to the table and you said, come back to the table, and they successfully walked over to the table and sat on the chair. And let's say that they're not doing this often enough, but now you're starting to see this behavior. You want to reinforce that immediately by giving that break if they enjoy, let's say, jumping on the trampoline, and that's why they're attempting to escape the table. So you would say to your learner, back to the table, you can follow through, or they, let's say, walk independently to the table, which is perfect. Once they sit on the chair, you can say, all right, let's go play, and go with your learner and play. And I think that's a really other important thing to keep in mind is don't send your learner off to go play on their own. Join them in that play so that you're not paired with being just a demand person, that you're also that fun person. So you can go back and, let's say, jump on the trampoline. And then you would say to them, okay, back to the table. They walk independently to the table. They sit down, and you might do a high probability, type demand. Do this. They do it. All right, let's go play. And you build up gradually, but you're giving those frequent breaks. And then you might build up to back to the table. They sit down. They clap their hands. They put their arms up. Maybe they're on a specific VR schedule. So maybe they're on a VR3. So you do anywhere between 0 to 6 responses, and you have them clap their hands, knock on the table, put their arms up. You hit your target question, and then you give them a break. These frequent breaks will decrease their want or need to escape the table. So they know that they're going to get that break at a certain time. It is variable and it's unpredictable. For some learners, that may not work for them. So you may actually need to have some kind of a schedule for them after they respond to X number of questions, kind of like a token system. Then they can get that break. So it's predictable for them. So you'll have to speak to your supervisor about that and ensure that you're putting the right thing into place for that specific learner. Let's continue. Reserving specific reinforcers for toilet training to increase voiding in the toilet versus accidents. The motivation to access that item because they have been deprived of it may result in the appropriate behavior. That increased motivation to engage in the right behavior to access the reinforcer. For example, your learner is learning to use the washroom and you reserve, let's just say, M&Ms. It's their favorite, treat, and they don't get it anywhere else. By reserving that reinforcer specific for washroom time, then they will the motivation for that will increase so that they will go to the washroom to access the M&M. And so if they get it everywhere else, then the motivation won't be there. So they won't engage in the correct behavior for you. So that's really what's important about understanding motivating operations or establishing those operations. And we talked about that in our establishing operations class. For circle time, singing most reinforcing songs to motivate them to stay and participate. Increase the value of the table by playing with the most reinforcing activities at the table. Increase the value of complying to you by providing lots of social praise and attention. Then you want to decrease response efforts for the desired behavior. Make the desired behavior easy for the learner to engage in. We're likely to engage in behaviors that are easy for us. For example, making a cup of coffee at home rather than driving out to the coffee shop if you wanted a coffee. If you love Coke but only have Pepsi at home, would you drive out just to get that Coke, or would you just drink Pepsi? So we're more likely to engage in what's easier. So make the desirable behavior easier for your learner. And you do that by adding prompts and supporting your learner so that they do the right thing for you with much ease. Give easy math problems at the table to increase table work. Sit at eye level so that it's easier for the learner to look at you if you're encouraging eye contact. Allowing the learner to stand during circle time if you want them to join initially. Then you can teach them to sit down. Have the learner answer 2 high probability questions, then let them leave the table, as I explained earlier. So here we are, making things easier for the learner to engage in the appropriate behavior. And over time, we would increase the difficulty level, but slowly and gradually. You never want to do 2 high probability questions, then jump to 14 questions. Your learner will engage in problem behavior. Many times I've seen this happen. We get too excited that our learners are engaging in the correct behavior. For example, coming to circle time, and then we start placing more demands on them, such as asking them questions or making them sit or whatever it may be. So take it slow. So here's a diagram to show. Giving an easy task. Learner completes the easy task, then they have access to the reinforcer rather than engaging in problem behavior. Escaping the table to get access to the reinforcer. Both of those can result in access to the item, but we want the desired behavior to occur to access that item. Number 4, we want to remove the SD or cues for the undesired behavior. You want to eliminate conditions that would evoke the competing behavior. For example, remove chips from your cupboard if you want to succeed. You simply can't say that you will be disciplined and not eat those chips. You need to get rid of them altogether. And this goes for our learners as well. In a learning environment, you want to remove toys from the environment or control them. Imagine your learner is required to play with you because you want to run man trials. But all these toys are on the floor near you and they can access them freely. The learner may simply pick up and leave to play with those items that were not held back and laying around the room. And they don't need to talk for those items. So control your environment. The learner needs to go through you to get access to these reinforcers. Keep that in mind. Position the table to remove distractions. Don't let a learner sit by the window if they're going to look outside and ignore you. Don't sit a learner near another peer that will talk to them and distract them from their work or vice versa. Close doors to minimize running out of the room if needed. A big issue in schools is learners will escape the class altogether. Now, you need to follow your school rules and protocols, but if closing the doors is an option because of flight risk, then that is something you can do to eliminate and reduce the SD for escape, and that SD would be the open door. Remove flashcards off the table. So remember, when you told your learner to come back to the table and there was a math worksheet, that's an SD for work time, which may result in problem behavior. So get rid of it initially. Have toys at the table and gradually place work on the table over time as the learner tolerates the sight of the work. Next, remove establishing operations for the undesired behavior. Make the outcome of the undesired behavior less reinforcing. For example, if a learner engages in silly behavior to get your attention, avoid laughing or interacting with the learner in that moment. You want to reserve that reinforcer for the desired behavior. So if they're doing their work appropriately, you can give them attention then, a high five, a sticker, whatever the attention they like in that moment. They can have it when they engage in the correct behavior. For example, suppose you're working at the table with your learner and you start to give them a task to do, such as clapping their hands. But then they start engaging in problem behavior such as covering their face. Now, some people might want to re-engage their learner by tickling them or pulling out some reinforcers in that moment to see if what's going on, and maybe they're just not motivated in that moment and they think by pulling out reinforcers that's okay. we're actually in essence reinforcing that problem behavior in that moment. And so you want to be very careful. You don't want to give the attention or pull reinforcers out of your fun bag or bin because they're now engaging in problem behavior. We need to deal with that problem behavior following whatever protocol it may be. So I might have to follow through, or I might have to maybe conduct a compliance procedure or an extinction procedure, something that would teach the learner that what they're doing in that moment is incorrect, and I'm not going to pull out any of my magical tricks to have fun with them at the table until they do the right thing. So always think about the right behavior, the correct behavior, the desired behavior that you want, and I'm going to provide that fun stuff and the reinforcers and all of that. Now, if you started your session on the wrong note by not establishing the reinforcer beforehand, then you're going to have to work on that as an RBT. Think about, where did I go wrong and how can I fix that for the next trial? So if you didn't pull out a reinforcer and establish that motivation, or you didn't do a preference assessment, my recommendation would be to test out the motivation first. So you might lay out some things on the table, see what your learner gravitates towards, put the other items away, and then get started with your trial. Of course, take the reinforcer away. You can put it on the table beside you, in a bin, whatever you may have in place for the learner. Then you go into your trial. If the learner does not engage in the correct behavior, then you're not going to reestablish the motivation because you've already done that. Then you have to follow whatever the protocol may be. Imagine going to the grocery store when you're really hungry. What happens? You end up buying all sorts of things that you really didn't want or need. You'll buy ice cream, chips, and things you didn't even know existed in the store, but suddenly you want to try. So to avoid overbuying and possibly buying unhealthy treats, eat before you go to the grocery store. This removes the establishing operation because now you're satiated and you no longer feel that you need to eat. Have fun activities at the table and play in a fun manner. Now, I talked about that a lot when I was discussing establishing operations. Pairing, natural environment teaching. You want to be fun, sing, dance, play, use creative items. I talk about using a reinforcer in 10 different ways. This is a common issue when teaching MANS. A therapist will pick a target such as fire truck and give the learner access to the fire truck, but that will quickly die down after a while. So you need to become the fire truck, draw the fire truck, and so on. If you remove and decrease the EO for escaping you or leaving the table to get toys, then you'll be so much more successful in maintaining the learner's attention, and they'll stay with you for longer periods of time. Lastly, give the learner frequent breaks from the table to decrease the EO for escape. Many learners try to leave the table because they want to play with other toys or play in general. Avoid keeping a learner at the table longer than they can handle. So take appropriate data to measure how long they can successfully stay and increase that over time. Again, you want to eliminate the need for escaping by decreasing the EO. If they're deprived of breaks, edibles, toys, attention, then they'll engage in problem behaviors to access it. But if you give sufficient breaks and edibles, toys, attention, then your learner will no longer need to engage in these behaviors. The last thing we want to do is increase response effort for the undesired behavior. Make it harder for the learner to engage in problem behavior. For example, placing the cookie jar up high in the cupboard. Now that's harder for you to actually reach. You're feeling hungry. You look in the fridge and you see a ready-made salad. Do you eat the salad or drive out to McDonald's? Driving out to McDonald's requires more effort than taking the salad out of the fridge and eating it. For teaching situations, placing reinforcers out of reach to decrease grabbing behavior, or place a bin on the table blocking the reinforcer and having the learner grab that item off the table. Position the table in a way to block running so that the learner is not just getting up and leaving. Place edibles in a tightly closed container to avoid reinforcer theft. So now I've given you some tips to increase desired behavior and decrease undesired behavior. But Again, it's important to understand the function of the behavior and how we can use antecedent manipulation strategies. Identify and define the behavior of choice. Can the response effort be reduced and made easy for the learner? Analyze the antecedent situations. What SDs can evoke the desired behavior? What reinforcers can be used for the behavior of choice? And are they made contingently? So ask yourself, what is the function? And what would I do to increase the desirable behavior and decrease the unwanted behavior? The learner is given hard math questions. The learner spends the time at the table rubbing their eyes and looking around the room until time is up. The teacher needs to remove the task. So what's the function of the behavior here possibly? If you set escape, chances are that this behavior is maintained by escape, because removal of the task serves as a reinforcer. The learner is completely fine after the task is removed. They're playing with their preferred toys and no longer rubbing their eyes, and so on. What does it mean when the behavior is maintained by escape? Escape-maintained behaviors is when a learner is attempting to get away from you or a demand, the table, or even future instructions. For example, asking the learner to come back to the table. He sees flashcards on the table. This signals work. Your learner begins to engage in problem behaviors to avoid or postpone that work. So I want you to ask yourself, why is he escaping? Is the table paired with work only? Remember, you don't want your learner to associate the table with work only. You can play at the table and do fun arts and crafts. Over time, you can decrease the fun activities at the table to make it into a more realistic setting if you wanted it to resemble school. Again, as we're developing programs for our learners, we need to think of the end goal and where we'd like to see them. We want kids to be in a school, sitting at the table, working for 20 to 30 minutes possibly, but initially we need to work up to that. So, am I paired up with a table or only demands? Be sure you're not that type of instructor that teaches at the table or whatever it may be, then sends the child off to go play on their own. That's a big no-no, because the learner will associate you with work and want to escape you. You're not fun, you're only work. My little guy AA, when I came to observe him with his instructor before I took over, he was being toilet trained, and when given a task, he would say pee-pee, and the therapist would let him go. If he peed in the toilet, he got 5 minutes to play, and it was his break time. Well, he would pee a drop, literally squeeze it out just to get that drop so that he could go play. The instructor didn't see a problem with that, so he was escaping the table, work, and her. Even when they played, which was not often, he would ask to go pee. Then he got playtime, and his playtime was always alone. Now, you can ask yourself, am I asking too many questions? Avoid asking questions back to back. What are you playing with? What color is it? Make it go around. Say choo-choo. How many do you see? We get a lot of behaviors when a therapist doesn't run their teaching procedure accurately. For example, the therapist will present the SD, followed by the prompt, then transfer trial, then the learner makes a mistake, so they do an error correction over and over to get the correct behavior. But this will end up triggering a problem behavior because the learner is getting, in essence, frustrated. They can't get it right, and you're trying to make them get it. So this is a skill that will need to be discussed with your supervisor so that they can determine the problem. Maybe the learner can't tack the picture or they can't echo you. So this needs to be addressed first. So always ensure that you are running your programs accurately. Remember, if you're prompting, the learner needs to engage in that behavior. If they're not, why would you even run a transfer trial? We need to address that issue first. Now, the other question to ask yourself is, am I not giving frequent breaks? Often a therapist is on a roll, her learner is doing amazing, then suddenly we get this problem behavior, and the therapist will say, but he was so good, we've been working for 25 minutes and And this is a learner that can only do work for maybe 7 minutes. So think about how long they're working at the table. If they have, see their VR schedule, if they have one, which should be increased slowly. Then ask yourself, do I have valuable reinforcers? Your learner could be escaping the table because you've been offering the same car for the past 30 minutes and the learner has satiated. Or is the task too hard? Giving these hard math questions or reading skills, can my learner do it? If not, you need to alter that. Is the learner getting breaks after a problem behavior? Maybe over time you realize they've been working for 25 minutes and a behavior happens, you give more breaks. So the learner realizes that after problem behavior, the breaks increase dramatically in comparison to when they sit nicely and do work. Finally, does the learner have a way to ask for a break? If you've overworked them, can they say, "Excuse me, Miss Johnson, can I have a break?" If not, that's something we need to teach them. Horner and colleagues in 1991 examined adolescents that engaged in problem behaviors, which were maintained by escape. They interspersed easy tasks before presenting difficult tasks. The rate of problem behavior decreased and compliance increased. Dyer and colleagues in 1990 tested choice making and its influence on problem behaviors. Students chose the educational task and reinforcer. This decreased their problem behaviors and increased the value of the educational task because the learner was able to choose it. So, how to improve behaviors maintained by escape? Present a break card on the table. Present easy demands with difficult ones. Give reinforcers freely. It all depends on why they're escaping. Here's another behavior. What do you think is the function? So the teacher is talking to another teacher. The learner begins rocking in their seat and the teacher turns around and says, "Don't do that," and remains with the learner, terminating their conversation with the teacher. If you said attention seeking, then you're right, given the description that I gave you. Now, just a side note, sometimes behaviors are not that clear cut. That is why a full analysis needs to be completed. What does it mean when the learner engages in attention-maintained behaviors or attention-seeking behaviors? This is when the learner engages in a behavior to get your reaction or someone else's reaction in the room. For example, the learner begins throwing toys and spitting to get your reaction. So when does this happen? Possibly when the learner is engaging in unwanted behavior and you verbally react to it and say something like, "Stop." Does he do it when I'm not looking? So you're writing something down and the learner begins engaging in this unwanted behavior. Does he do it to my face and I usually put a frown on my face to show disappointment? Maybe the learner enjoys that kind of social interaction. Often with these behaviors, you'll see things like the learner doing something and then they look to see if anyone was looking or watching. You will see things like the learner doing something and then they may be looking at you to get a reaction, to see if anyone's watching. Children that are motivated by attention can be amazing learners because you shape their attention seeking to appropriate times, such as after a task completion, showing their work, putting it up on the wall or maybe on the fridge. These attention seekers thrive off of that, and we can encourage them to engage in the behavior we'd like. Vollmer and colleagues in 1993 examined adults that engaged in self-injury, which was maintained by attention. When attention was given freely and non-contingently every 5 minutes, the EO for attention decreased, and so did self-injury. How to improve behaviors maintained by attention? Well, give attention freely for good behaviors. You can do things like, "Johnny, I love how you're walking. Great sitting." Then withhold attention for undesirable behaviors. If the learner is engaging in behaviors to get your attention and you react, then you're giving them that exact attention that they want. So you want to ensure that you're not reinforcing those behaviors. Now, this can be very challenging because often a learner in the moment will do something that's inappropriate, such as they throw their shoe as you're getting them ready to go home. And sometimes our first reaction is to reprimand it and say something like, "No, thank you. That's not nice. Why did you do that?" Without really analyzing the function of that behavior, you could be accidentally reinforcing it, which is something that you don't want to do. And I coach staff on this all the time. You really want to pay attention to when a behavior happens, problem behavior specifically. We want to just stop for a moment and instead of reacting to it, to really look and analyze it and say, why did he just throw his shoe as we're getting ready to go home? Let's say the parent is coming to pick him up and he's turning the lights on and off as you're trying to talk to the parent. They might be doing that again to gain the parent's attention or maybe your attention because the attention is now diverted. So rather than attending to the child saying, don't do that, stop, that's not nice, you can't turn off the lights, maybe you could have something in place so that you're not allowing the learner to engage in that problem behavior and you're attending to it. So you might come up with a strategy. You might talk to your supervisor and say, I've noticed that every time that Johnny goes home and we're getting him ready and his mom comes to pick him up, he's turning the lights on and off. What should we do? Because I'm trying to talk to mom and give her an update, but I can't seem to do that. Well, all you have to do is talk to your supervisor about it, come up with a plan. So maybe the way that you give the update to mom is before you bring the learner out, or maybe you can just send an email. You can come up with a way, or you can teach the learner that when two people are talking and the attention is diverted from him, maybe some appropriate things that he can do. So you can put in some replacement strategies in there so that you can actually have him engage in the right thing during that time. So maybe waiting patiently, maybe that's what you want to teach. And so that there's some program ideas that you can start thinking of with you and your supervisor. What does it mean when a behavior is maintained by gaining access to a reinforcer? This is when the learner engages in problem behaviors to get a toy, edible, or activity. For example, the learner grabs, reaches, flops to the floor, or screams to get an item. The question to ask yourself is, why is the learner engaging in these behaviors to begin with? Why is he wanting these reinforcers? Is the learner having a hard time waiting for the item or activity? Sometimes a learner requests an item, but when they ask for it, they mean now, and waiting 10 seconds may be too long for them. Maybe I'm not giving the reinforcer often enough. I have this conversation with staff all the time. Could this behavior have been avoided if the reinforcer was given after they completed their work or at some point during the day? No access to the reinforcer will cause severe deprivation, which may result in an explosive behavior. I only give reinforcers if the learner engages in a task for me. How many feel they fall under this one here? This happens a lot. A teacher or therapist gives an item only when the learner does a task, but never as a freebie. I often withhold the reinforcer. Again, a lot of therapist teachers do this. When new learners in their program come in and they're pairing, you see that they give freely. You want the learner to give you the reinforcer and allow you to touch it and eventually tolerate you withholding it briefly, which is an important skill we want to teach our learners because we want to be able to withhold the items briefly as we're teaching them whatever program that we're working on. Common mistakes that happen during teaching is a therapist or teacher will only give a reinforcer after a task. You don't want to teach your learner to associate reinforcers with tasks only. That's why preference assessments are important. I also don't like saying common phrases such as, what are we working for? We don't want a learner to work for things. We want to reinforce them with the items contingent on appropriate behaviors. Another common mistake is you don't give reinforcers freely. The learner always works for the reinforcer, which eventually makes the reinforcer too effortful. Another common mistake is you withhold the reinforcer until the learner gets frustrated or upset. So these are things you want to avoid. Give freely. If you're working on MANS, Those you can withhold. But again, the learner doesn't need to ask for that item every single time. So you can give the learner an opportunity to ask one time, and then sometimes you can give it freely. Don't hold back reinforcers all the time. Be sure to give choice. These antecedent strategies can help decrease problem behaviors as you begin working on man training. Let's look at this one. What is the function? The learner is playing alone and is throwing hockey sticks. They do this because it sounds good. Take a moment and think about this one. If you said automatic reinforcement, then you could be right. What does it mean when the learner engages in automatic positive reinforcement? Automatic positive reinforcement is when the learner engages in a problem behavior because it provides stimulation of their senses and is enjoyable to them. For example, the learner shakes his hands, spins around, climbs furniture. These could be stimulating to them. Ask yourself, why is he engaging in automatic positive reinforcement? Is he bored? Does he have play skills? When given a toy, can he play appropriately? When alone, does he do anything? Am I engaging him? I'll give you an example. I had a learner that was working with the team. And this learner was engaging in high screams, high pitched. It was kind of a scream, but not really a scream, but it was very high pitched. And he did it nonstop. And so the senior therapist that I had on the team, I asked them to go in and take a look and determine what they thought was the function of the behavior. So initially, she thought it could possibly be escape motivated, or maybe it was escape from the tasks because we were presenting him with tasks. So she went in and she manipulated some variables and took a look and observed. And she came back to me and said, you know what, I really don't know what's going on. It's a really challenging behavior, and I really don't know what the function is. So I went along with her and we sat down and we observed the behavior. And of course, I saw the behavior happening at the table when they were doing work, when they removed the work, when he was jumping on the trampoline. In any situation, we ended up seeing this behavior. So I said, all right, let's try something a little different here. I sat in the chair with him and I started to run through his trials. And what I did was I just picked up my pace a little bit more with him, and I had trials going, and it was just flowing so much more natural with him, and he was really engaged. And we took data during that time, and I asked them, I said, how many times did he engage in that screaming like behavior, that high pitch volume, scream? And the therapist and the senior therapist looked at each other and they said, 0. In the 20 minutes that you sat with him, he did not engage in that behavior. And what we found was that because he was not engaged and we weren't doing the activities that would actually get him out of his self-stimulatory world, he preferred to be engaging in that self-stim as opposed to being engaged with us. And so we weren't doing a very good job of engaging him. So by changing up the flow of his session and the things that we were doing with him, we actually got him to reduce that behavior because now he was engaged. And so it's very important for us to really analyze again the function because yes, in a sense, that one was automatic reinforcement because he was not engaged, but at the same time, it could have also been escape motivated. So we might have had a dual function there. Was it attention seeking? Well, in that case, it didn't appear to be because we ended up implementing a quiet when we were going and doing routine activities such as going to the washroom or getting dressed. And he didn't engage in that behavior at that time because we told him to stay quiet during those transitions. So in that moment, we didn't think it was attention seeking because we would have then seen that behavior possibly increase. So by engaging your learner and playing with them and interacting with them and playing in different ways, you'll find that your learner may become more engaged in what you're doing and then no longer engage in those self-stimulatory behaviors. So let's talk about how to improve those behaviors a little bit further. So how do you improve behaviors that are maintained by automatic positive reinforcement? Engage the learner in activities and minimize downtime. Before you write down data or talk to someone, give your learner a preferred activity. All right, let's do another one. What's the function of the behavior here? So the teacher is talking loudly and the learner covers their ears and starts rocking. The learner is doing this because it's giving them relief. Take a moment and think about this one. Now, if you said automatic negative reinforcement, then you're absolutely right. This is when the learner engages in a problem behavior to stop painful or aversive stimulation. For example, we often jump up and down after stubbing our toe. This is a behavior where we're trying to deal with the pain. So why is my learner engaging in automatic negative reinforcement? Does he have a headache? Does he have a stomach ache? Is he itchy? Does he have a sore throat? Now, going back to our example of them covering their ears while I'm singing very loudly, maybe my loud voice is actually aversive to them. And so by covering their ears, it's relieving that pain. So think about your learners when you are working with them. If you're singing very loudly or you're in their face and they're, flinching, or maybe they're covering their ears, bring your tone down a little bit or your volume down a little bit so that you can ensure that the learner is receptive to that. I think a really important part of teaching is, or with anything, is that you really have to be attentive to your audience or to your learner or to whoever it is that you're talking to. If they appear to look bored, or if they're covering their ears, or if they're turning their back from you, they're giving you signals of something is not right here. When two people are engaged in a conversation and it's flowing and it's great, you'll find their eye contact is there, their body language is there, they might even be leaning forward. They're really into it and you can see it, versus if you watch people that their conversation is not going so well, then you might see, for example, one person is talking while the other person is on their phone. Now that's an indication of that person is really not in tune with this person, and something's got to change here. And so if you were that person talking to the person that's on the phone, I might stop talking because that person's just not really engaged in the conversation. If I'm updating a client, for example, and they're looking at their child and they're dealing with their problem behavior, for example, there's really no point in me continuing that conversation. So it's very, very important for you to be in tune with the person that you are working with or that you are talking with. So pay attention to your learner and see how they're responding to you. If antecedent interventions are used alone, it will not result in long-lasting improvements in behavior. These must be used along with consequent strategies to produce reduced problem behaviors over time. So what are some types of antecedent interventions? I want to review non-contingent reinforcement, NCR, high probability request sequence, functional communication training. NCR is when reinforcers are provided regardless of the learner's behavior. They're provided freely and frequently. For example, a learner that engages in problem behavior to get your attention, you would provide attention frequently and freely on a fixed or variable interval. The key here is that you're not providing the reinforcer when they engage in the problem behavior, but you provide it freely outside of that. So you might have an interval of, let's say, 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, you're going to give the child a high five, or you're going to give them a tickle or something that would provide them with that attention. But if they engage in the problem behavior during that time, you would not give them any sort of attention. You might just ignore and just wait. Wait until the behavior stops, or you might follow through with the task depending on what's required. There are 3 types of NCR procedures: NCR with positive reinforcement, NCR with negative reinforcement, and NCR with automatic reinforcement. Researchers have shown the positive use of NCR with positive reinforcement for behaviors maintained by attention. They provided the adults with attention and small bits of food on a fixed schedule, for example, every 5 seconds. Over time, they thinned the schedule and found that behaviors decreased significantly for 3 of their adults. Kodak and colleagues in 2003 examined NCR with escape-maintained behaviors. 2 boys aged 4 diagnosed with autism engaging in hitting, throwing teaching material during a demand situation, and so on. These boys were given a break every 10 seconds during the NCR escape condition. The schedule was thinned over 2 consecutive sessions when the criteria was met. Behaviors improved and problem behaviors decreased. Lindbergh and colleagues in 2003 used NCR to decrease self-injurious behaviors maintained by automatic reinforcement. The 2 women in the study were given preferred toys, such as beads and strings, that they could play with throughout the day. They found that object manipulation of preferred items decreased problem behaviors maintained by automatic reinforcement because it competed with the problem behavior. With non-contingent reinforcement, reinforcers are provided regardless of the learner's behavior. Provide the reinforcer freely and frequently. For example, a learner that engages in problem behavior to get your attention, provide attention frequently and freely on a fixed or variable interval. So think about your learner here. You have a learner that's engaging in problem behavior to get your attention. Rather than attending to that problem behavior, and this happens all the time, your child is sitting, the learner is sitting in circle time and they're engaging in that problem behavior. They're, let's say, jumping in circle time, or they're touching another peer, or whatever they might be doing during that time. And you start saying, stop, don't touch him, don't do that. And you're constantly on them with that problem behavior. If you changed your strategy and you said, okay, every time they do something right, even if they're just sitting properly, I'm going to actually give them attention, you'll see that that behavior will improve significantly, and you'll have that problem behavior reduced. So if they're sitting in circle time, you might say something like, hey, I love how you're sitting, thumbs up, good job. You might have a good job board. Whatever it is that you're putting in place for the proper behavior, that's what you're going to reinforce. If they engage in the inappropriate behavior, you might just ignore it. And, you see them sitting there jumping, maybe someone can redirect them and sit them down, but you could actually be reinforcing other kids that are sitting properly. And again, for those that are attention seekers, if I'm providing attention to, little Johnny over here, and little Billy is like, whoa, wait a minute, I want that attention too, they'll start engaging in the correct behavior so that you could start attending to them as well. So think about that when you're working with your kiddos. So here's a chart. Look at the strategy and see how non-contingent reinforcement is being used. The schedule of NCR should be more frequent than the problem behavior. The NCR must have the same function as the problem behavior. Thinning the schedule is important over time. So when I talk about the schedule of reinforcement for the NCR being more frequent than the problem behavior, if your problem behavior occurs every 5 seconds, then you need to be providing the reinforcement, that non-contingent reinforcement, maybe every 3 seconds then. So there has to be data that is taken to see how frequently that problem behavior is occurring. So again, let's go back to our circle time example. If I'm sitting there and the learner engages in the problem behavior every 15 seconds, then I know that I should go just below that, and I should maybe provide that non-contingent reinforcement every 10 seconds. So I know that every 10 seconds I should be saying, good job, Johnny, love how you're sitting, Johnny, way to go, Johnny, at that 10-second mark. In regards to the NCR being the same function, again, if you are looking at a behavior that is maintained by attention, but you give them a toy, well, they're not doing this behavior because they want the toy. They're doing it because they want your attention. So look at what the function of the behavior is. Again, you're going to have to speak to your supervisor about this, and you really need to sit down and look at why we think they're engaging in that problem behavior. So if it's attention, we need something that's based on attention. If it's to gain access to a reinforcer, then we can, have something that is based on gaining access to a reinforcer. Going back to my little kiddo who was sitting there at the table engaging in that high-pitched scream, again, when we were working with him and we started doing lots of trials and going a lot faster, and we changed up the style of his teaching and really engaging him, the other thing that we did that was very different than what the therapists were doing was we were providing a reinforcer, an edible reinforcer, almost every 30 seconds. And we also found that the behavior decreased So we put in a multi-component design basically to treat this problem behavior. So he was getting access to his reinforcer, which is what he want. We also knew that that could have been a part of the function there because he was engaging in a lot of food theft. So we had the reinforcers on the table, and he would typically leap from his chair and grab the reinforcer that was on the table. So we ended up blocking the reinforcer. So we put a bin on the table so that we made it a little harder for him to reach the edible reinforcer. But then what we also did was we increased the time that he could get it. So we gave it to him every 30 seconds. So now we decreased the theft and we decreased that vocal stereotypy that looked like vocal stereotypy, but it had multiple functions. So it had the function of escape. It had the function of he wanted to gain access to his reinforcer, and the function of the self-stimulation because he was not engaged. So we took a look at all those three functions, and it decreased the behavior significantly. And lastly, with thinning the schedule of reinforcement, we don't want to give our learners an edible every 30 seconds for the rest of their life. That's not realistic. That's not our end goal. If they go to school, if you speak to any school teacher, they'll say there's no way that I can give them a reinforcer every 30 seconds. So we have to work towards increasing that time. So I'm going to, if I'm doing it every 30 seconds, then I'm going to do it every 45 seconds, then maybe every, minute, then 2 minutes, then 5 minutes. So we have to gradually do that over time when we see that problem behavior has decreased and they're no longer doing it. So that's really the key with non-contingent reinforcement. Let's move on to the next one. So with high probability request sequence here, we're interspersing easy tasks with difficult tasks. Give the learner something easy to do followed by something difficult. If you think back to our discrete trial training, one of the things that you saw there was my use of the high probability request sequence. So we have all their targets written on cue cards, and we go through them very quickly. There's a nice fast pace to it. And we're allowing the learner to engage in easy tasks so that we could build that momentum. This reduces the value of escape or non-compliance. This is a helpful method that builds behavioral momentum. The learner starts off with easy things they can do, and you build up slowly to do the target. Imagine you told your learner to clean up all their toys. They might find that to be a very difficult task. So you can start off by slowly saying, give me a high five, give me the car, put the car in the bin, and you build up slowly, and then you can say clean up. Something important to keep in mind is when giving instructions, high probability are the ones that are known to the learner. Low probability tasks are ones that the learner may need your assistance with or may have a hard time doing, and you need to assist them with that one. For example, a learner may know and understand what cleanup means, but they don't want to clean up. That's different from not knowing how to clean up or understanding the instruction. So keep that in mind. Functional communication training is when you teach the learner a desirable way to communicate their want, you identify the reinforcer maintaining the problem behavior, and you find a replacement behavior to access those reinforcers. Using gestures, pictures, signs. Again, we talked about this during our MAN training class. A learner needs to know how to communicate what they want and need, so we can reduce problem behavior significantly by teaching appropriate skills. Duran, 1999, used a digitized speech communication device for 5 children with severe disabilities. The children engaged in problem behavior to access objects and activities. The use of the communication device decreased their problem behavior significantly. Some problem behaviors can be prevented and decreased using antecedent manipulation strategies, while others need consequence strategies to decrease the behavior. Reinforce desirable behavior on a continuous schedule of reinforcement, then an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. Any behavior you want to increase, you need to reinforce it. We discussed punishment procedures. These can be used to decrease problem behavior. But first, if antecedents are causing the problem behavior, adjust those first. It's unethical for us to use punishment procedures first. Common mistakes with escape-motivated behaviors. A learner engages in problem behavior. The instructor either ends demands. This teaches a learner that to escape work, engaging in this behavior will result in termination of the task. Attention-seeking behaviors. When a learner engages in the problem behavior, the instructor orients towards the learner, lectures them, verbally tells them to stop or don't do it or I don't like that. This teaches a learner that to get someone's attention, all they need to do is behave in that certain way. Gain access to a reinforcer. When a learner engages in problem behavior, the instructor pulls out all the fun toys that motivate the learner and tries to motivate them again. Again, this teaches a learner that when they're bored, all they need to do is engage in that behavior and the instructor will make things fun again or pull things out of their bag. All right, let's do a Scrabble word. The word is poi, P-O-I, and this is a Hawaiian dish. Let's look at some clinical examples. Billy engages in off-task behavior at the table. He will often shake his head, vocally script, and look off to the side. Each time he does this, the instructor stops giving demands and looks in the direction of the learner. She wonders what he's looking at. What do you think is wrong here? So in this example here, again, we see this quite often. If the learner is not engaged in the right thing in that moment, then we need not to attend to the learner. So it could be, again, escape motivated. He doesn't want to be at the table doing whatever the work is. He's looking off to the side. Now, I know sometimes when a learner does it, people might be looking to see what is he looking at? It doesn't matter. What matters is what is he supposed to be doing in that moment? And if he's not doing the right thing, whether it's writing the letter, doing that math question, clapping their hands, whatever's supposed to be happening in that moment, then don't attend to that. Don't get distracted. Focus on what the learner needs to be doing and prompt them to do the right thing, follow through with it, or you follow through to the best of your ability if you can. End that trial, give the learner a reinforcer. It may not be their top reinforcer. If they really wanted the iPad, you might give them, maybe the Play-Doh because they also like the Play-Doh, but you give that to them and then you step back for a moment and you go, what just happened? Why were they looking off to the side? Why were they not engaged in the activity? So don't allow your learner to use behaviors to get out of the task because that in that moment looked like it was escape motivated. Let's continue. Billy has been working at the table for 15 minutes and suddenly begins rocking in his chair, sticking out his tongue, and laughing. His instructor realizes that he's getting bored, so she quickly sends him off to play. What's wrong with this? Well, if we were to analyze this one here, he's been sitting at the table for 15 minutes. How long can he sit at the table for and do actual work? Now, when I say sitting at the table, you could be sitting at the table and playing with your learners. So that's good and you can do that. But if they're doing work back to back for 15 minutes, that might just be too much for them. And now they will engage in problem behavior to leave. So here in this example, he's sticking out his tongue and he's laughing, he's rocking in his chair. So he's engaging in this problem behavior and now we say, oh, I get it. He's bored or he's been at the table for too long and maybe now we start to realize and then we make the decision of letting them go and play. But if you think about it in that moment, we've just reinforced that problem behavior. And so if it's continuing to happen, then we're actually promoting that behavior. So be very, very careful here. If you see that behavior happening, it's best to try to end off on a good note by doing some kind of a trial. So you might end off with a couple of high probabilities so that you can end off on a good note. And then you can say, okay, let's take a little bit of a break and you're going to play, maybe at the table or maybe you leave and you go play away from the table with them. And then you can come back. Another thing to just keep in mind is Often learners they're very quick, and this can be with anybody, whether it's, an employee, it could be an adult that you're working with, anybody. When I say learners, and I'm talking about anybody that you're working with, often I'll say kiddos, so I do apologize if you're someone who works with adults and you keep hearing me say kiddos. Again, these are things that you can do with anybody. But if you find that you have someone doing something that is demanding and they start engaging in some kind of problem behavior, then you start to lighten the load. So for example, if you're a supervisor and you have RBTs that are doing something for you, and you start lightening the load because they start to not do the right thing, making tasks easier will sometimes increase other problem behavior. So they might start engaging in problem behavior knowing that you will lighten the load so that they can then go play. So just keep those in mind. What we implement as consequences in that moment, people will pick up on it. So if you're an RBT and you have, someone that is doing something for you, or you're working with your learner and you ask them, they're working at the table with you, and then they start to engage in problem behavior, and then suddenly, everything becomes very easy, then your learner will pick up on that. So again, be very careful. So do speak to your supervisor about that, because we want to deal with the problem behavior before it happens and not always be reactive. We want to be proactive and not always reactionary. All right, everyone, let's jump into the quiz. Remember, I'm shaping your behaviors, so don't be alarmed if you see questions from previous quizzes. I want to retest your knowledge throughout the course because I want you to ace the final exam. Antecedent manipulation strategies alter A. Stimuli that occur before the behavior. B. Stimuli that occur after the behavior. C. Antecedent stimulus. Or D. None of these. And the correct response is A. Stimuli that occur before the behavior. Your learner engages in attention-seeking behaviors. So you try A. Removing SDs for the desirable behavior. B. Increasing efforts for the undesirable behavior. C. Creating establishing operations for the desirable behavior. Or D. None of these. And the correct response is C, creating establishing operations for the desirable behaviors. Your learner engages in escape-motivated behaviors, so you try A, removing SDs for the undesirable behavior. B, increasing efforts for the desirable behavior. C, creating establishing operations for the undesirable behavior. Or D, none of these. And the correct response is A, removing SDs for the undesirable behavior. What is an example of presenting SDs for the desirable behavior? A, putting the cookies out of reach. B, giving the learner a choice. C, reserving chips for circle time. D, eliminating toys from the floor. And the correct response is B, giving the learner a choice. What is an example of removing SDs for the undesirable behavior? A, putting the cookies out of reach. B, giving the learner a choice. C, reserving chips for circle time. D, eliminating toys from the floor. And the correct response is D, eliminating toys from the floor. What is an example of creating EOs for the desirable behavior? A, putting the cookies out of reach. B, giving the learner a choice. C, reserving chips for circle time. D, eliminating toys from the floor. And the correct response is C, reserving chips for circle time. Tommy is screaming for cookies and the RBT always gives him cookies so he doesn't scream. What is the function of the behavior? A, escape motivated. B, attention seeking. C, gain access to reinforcer. Or D, automatic reinforcement. And the correct response is C, gain access to a reinforcer. Tommy screams and the RBT says, "Whoa, that's too loud." Tommy screams again. What is the function of the behavior? A, escape motivated. B, attention seeking. C, gain access to a reinforcer. Or D, automatic reinforcement. And the correct response is B, attention seeking. Tommy screams when given a puzzle. The RBT removes the puzzle and puts him in timeout. What could be the function of his behavior here? A, escape motivated. B, attention seeking. C, gain access to the reinforcer. Or D, automatic reinforcement. And the correct response is A, escape motivated. Tommy flaps his hands when given a puzzle. The RBT removes the puzzle and puts him in timeout. What is the function of the behavior? A, escape motivated. B, attention seeking. C, gain access to reinforcer. Or D, automatic reinforcement. And the correct response is A, escape motivated. Again, the key here is that the puzzle was presented and then removed. Some may look at this and say, well, it looks like it's automatic reinforcement. Again, it really does depend on the situation and the analysis of that behavior. But for this example, it looks to be escape motivated. Your learner won't come back to the table. What can you do? A, force them back. B, place fun things on the table every time they come back. C, place edibles on the table from time to time. Or D, ignore it and it will get better. And the correct response is both B and C. Place fun things on the table every time they come back. You can also place edibles on the table from time to time. Obviously, it doesn't have to be every single time or from time to time. You can vary that, and that's something that you would speak to your supervisor about. But definitely when they're first learning that skill, you could use that as a strategy. You give the learner their sandwich and they push it away. What could the possible function be here? A, attention seeking. B, escape motivated. C, gain access to reinforcers. D, automatic reinforcement. E, cannot be determined. And the correct response here is B, escape motivated. Probably don't want to eat their sandwich, and so they're pushing it away. And so, again, we'd have to determine why they're pushing it away. I think that's always the biggest question. Whenever you say back to the table, your learner flops to the floor and screams. What can you do to alter this and support your learner? A, guide them nicely back to work. B, change what you say, such as table time. C, change nothing. It will get better over time. D, don't give them breaks to avoid this altogether. And the correct response is B, change what you say, such as saying table time. Now, this is a great antecedent manipulation strategy. If you know that saying back to the table may trigger problem behavior, by changing the antecedent, that could resolve the issue. But of course, you may go back to it and then eventually pair that word back. But then again, you may need to look at what's happening at back to the table and why the refusal. But that might be a start. What are the 4 functions of behavior? A, escape, tangible reinforcement, social negative reinforcement, and automatic punishment. B, social positive reinforcement, tangible reinforcement, social negative reinforcement, and automatic reinforcement. Or C, positive reinforcement, tangible escape, negative reinforcement, and automatic reinforcement. Or D, social positive extinction, gain access to reinforcer, social reinforcement, and automatic. And the correct response is B, social positive reinforcement, tangible reinforcement, social negative reinforcement, and automatic reinforcement. What is positive reinforcement? A, the addition of an aversive stimulus. B, the removal of an aversive stimulus. C, the addition of a desirable stimulus. Or D, the removal of a desirable stimulus. And the correct response is C, the addition of a desirable stimulus. A learner at your center sits and waits at the table while the therapist is preparing for her session. You notice this and see that the learner is flapping their hands during this time. What could you recommend? A, nothing. It's not your problem. B, tell the therapist to be better prepared and notify your supervisor. C, complain to your supervisor. Or D, encourage the therapist to give the learner activities while he waits. And the correct response is D, encourage the therapist to give the learner activities while he waits. This is when a stimuli follows the behavior and increases it over time. Is it A, intermittent reinforcement, B, positive reinforcement, C, continuous reinforcement, or D, none of the above? And the correct response is B, positive reinforcement. You find that your learner is unable to echo certain words and therefore cannot do an echoic to intraverbal transfer during the intraverbal program. This has been evoking a lot of problem behaviors. Your supervisor is scheduled to see you in a week. What could you do in the meantime? A, nothing, it's not your problem. B, teach the learner to produce the echoic in isolation and reinforce it. C, do an error correction until the learner gets it right. D, keep teaching it, maybe they'll get it. And the correct response is B, teach the learner to produce the echoic in isolation and reinforce it. So if they're not able to produce the word in isolation, you could teach it on the side and then bring it back into the program to help out. But of course, speak to your supervisor so they know of the problem. Which one accurately defines punishment? A, decreases a behavior when a stimulus is delivered. B, increases a behavior when a stimulus is delivered. And the correct response is A, decreases behavior when a stimulus is delivered. The learner is given a puzzle and begins to cry. The teacher takes the puzzle away, he stops crying. Each time the puzzle is presented, the learner cries. Which principle is responsible for this? A, reinforcement, or B, punishment? And the correct response is A, reinforcement. Remember, anytime a behavior is increasing, reinforcement is responsible for this. The learner you work with shouts out during circle time and begins to stick out their tongue and jump around. All the kids laugh. You're not sure if the behavior is escape maintained or attention seeking. You decide to A, ignore the learner's behavior, B, document the ABCs, C, have the learner join for a minute or so and remove them before the behavior begins, or D, all of the above. And the correct response is D, all of the above. It's important to ignore the problem behavior and not attend to it during that time. It's also important that you document the behavior. And then, of course, it's important to use that non-contingent reinforcement and allow the learner to escape your circle time and come back to it. So maybe they get that time away, that break almost away from the table. What does an FBA provide? A, aims to identify the function of behavior. B, identifies skill deficits. C, defines the frequency, intensity, and duration of behaviors. D, both A and B. E, all of the above. Or F, none of the above. And the correct response is E, all of the above. What are low probability behaviors? A, behaviors previously learned. B, behaviors being taught. C, behaviors that are mastered. D, behaviors on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. And the correct response is B, behaviors being taught. Why may a child engage in problem behavior? A, because kids are kids. B, because they think it's funny. C, because of their inability to communicate effectively. And D, none of the above. And the correct response is C, because of their inability to communicate. The learner is throwing toys in the classroom. What could the possible function be? A, attention seeking. B, escape motivated. C, gain access to reinforcers. D, automatic reinforcement. Or E, cannot be determined. And the correct response here is E, cannot be determined. There's not enough information. And so if we're taking ABC data, one of the most important things to do is to take as much information as you possibly can, because we don't know what the function is if the information is just the child threw a toy when they were in the classroom. We need to know the antecedents and we need to know the consequences. My final thoughts. We need to look at behaviors from all angles. We don't want to just look at decreasing problem behavior by using punishment or extinction all the time, but rather to look at the function and ways we can alter antecedents prior to making consequent changes. However, we know that antecedent strategies alone may not change behavior. We do have to look at consequences and ways to decrease problem behaviors as well. Teaching skills is also essential. A client that is unable to communicate needs to learn these skills. Learn how to ask for a break, or can I have this or that? So the next time your client engages in problem behaviors, look at ways to increase the desirable behavior and ways to decrease the undesirable behavior. And speak to your supervisor. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.